Test. 1, 2. Oh dear. Monday, 14th, 2024. I'm Felix, the archivist of Bethnal Green's Forgotten Library. I'm 55 now, and I've worked here for 30 years in these cold, dark tunnels beneath Bethnal Green. So my grandkids have started asking me about my job. They're curious, and I guess I can't blame them. I've never really talked much about it. The hidden library, the wartime tunnels, the records that never really make it to the light of day. So I started making recordings on this old recording device. It's not exactly whistleblowing, more like pulling back the curtain a little, showing people the things most wouldn't believe if they had even heard of it. So I'm here currently sitting in the archives, surrounded by the shelves stacked with dusty tomes and files that haven't been touched in decades. Luckily, they've given me an intern who knows more about the internet than I'll ever do, and he's agreed that he will help me edit these recordings and put them on the YouTube. I'm a bit old-fashioned, you see. Technology has never been my strong suit, but then the stories deserve to be told, and maybe the world is ready to hear them now. Maybe not. So anyway, this is a story that keeps me up still at night, and I offer it to you, although I cannot promise comfort. So our first story is about a boy named Darren in the late 1980s who found a doorway to somewhere that should have remained closed. Now, I found this in a ledger that was hidden at the back of the archives, and when I opened it, it'd been scribbled out and scrawled by a previous librarian, almost in a way to cover up what she had recorded from maybe the person directly. I decided to send the ledger upstairs to be x-rayed so we could try and decipher some of the crossed out words that the previous librarian had destroyed. We believe here that they probably were crossed out to not cause alarm or panic to the general public if these had to go on public records. Luckily enough, they never did, and so we have them here. Anyway, I do digress. Darren and his friend, let's call him Thomas, were the kind of boys who would find adventure in abandoned places. They played where others would fear to tread, climbing down into the overgrown railway cutting on the south side of Sydenham Hill. The branch-line to Crystal Palace had been closed for decades, the iron gates of the tunnel long sealed, but Darren, ever the stubborn one, found a way in. It wasn't easy. They squeezed through, scraping elbows on the rusty iron, but after brushing themselves down, they found themselves in the mouth of the tunnel, its darkness swallowing their small forms. The air was different there, heavy with damp and something else, a silence too thick, too intentional, like the tunnel itself was holding its breath. Even as I sit here writing this, I swear I can almost feel it, that unnatural stillness, the kind that makes your heart beat just a bit louder, your skin prickle just a bit more. It's not a memory I lived, but it's one that echoes through the pages. They had a torch, a flickering beam barely cutting through the blackness, and they walked deeper into the void. The further they went, the more it felt like they were moving away from the world above, from the roads, the woodlands, their homes, leaving behind everything they knew. Halfway in, Darren found it, a small opening in a brick wall, barely larger than the fireplace. Someone had scratched words above it, faint but unmistakable. To hell. But the warning didn't deter Darren. He was the kind that saw a locked door and needed to know what lay behind it. He threw a stone into the hole, and they listened. But there was just an echo, just emptiness. So, of course, he knelt and crawled inside, torch clenched between his teeth, and Thomas followed. It was tight at first, bricks pressing close. But then the space opened up and they found themselves in what felt like another world, a chamber of blackened brick, arched and empty, with passages leading off into more darkness. It does often make me wonder what I would have done if I was one of them boys, on my hands and knees crawling in the darkness, finding these strange rooms with blackened bricks. I honestly think I would have turned around and ran straight away, but luckily they carried on. Darren spotted another hole in the far wall. Crouched, he went forward without a word. Thomas followed, his knees trembling. Chamber after chamber they passed through, each one like the last, dead silent, unmoving, and each time they followed and reached a new room there was another opening, smaller than the one before, drawing them further into the dark maze. In the third chamber, Darren turned off the torch, and Thomas felt darkness pour over him. A darkness so complete it was like being swallowed by something ancient. Oh, that's quite scary, really, isn't it, thinking about it? Sorry. He thought of reaching out, of touching Darren's shoulder, but his hands wouldn't move. The torch flickered back on, and they both breathed a sigh of relief. Then Darren noticed the next passage, the last one. It led to a room smaller than the rest, barely large enough for both boys to crouch inside. In one corner was a mattress. It was filthy and decaying and covered in a sort of a waxy coating that had been left to melt over a very long time, and the air in that space was different, heavier. Thomas felt it, like the eyes in the back of his neck. He knew they had gone too far. Darren dropped the torch and the light went out. Thomas waited for Darren to curse, to fumble for it, but only silence. The darkness around him seemed to grow thicker, more present, and then came a soft scrambling. But not from where Darren was, but from the far corner of the chamber. It moved up the wall, across the ceiling, and then nothing. Thomas whispered Darren's name, his voice swallowed by the dark. He waved his hand in front of him, where Darren should have been, but nothing. The fear was paralyzing, the cold, weightless terror that numbed his limbs. He felt his way backwards, into the opening, not daring to turn back on that chamber, that mattress. He crawled painfully slow, the walls scraping his shoulders, the ceiling pressing down on his back. Thomas made it to the second chamber, and then the first, and only there did he turn back, scrambling towards the main tunnel. He didn't look back until he was through, until he was standing in the cold railway tunnel, the air around him almost comforting in his stillness. Something moved behind him, a kick of the stones, a touch of his arm. Thomas spun, ready to scream, but it was Darren. Darren, pale and silent, his eyes wide in the torchlight. "Come on," Darren said, his voice hollow. "Let's go." Thomas didn't question it. Didn't ask how Darren gotten past him, how he'd found his way out. They stumbled through the tunnel, out into the cutting, into the pale light of day. Only then, in the cold, thin air, did Thomas dare to look in Darren's face. But there was something missing in his eyes, something hollow. He looked haunted. Gosh, it's rather scary, isn't it? I have to take a pause every now and again to remind myself that these things can't hurt me when I'm here, reading here in the library. Anyway, reading on, it looked like Thomas, who was the one the librarian was interviewing, had suggested that they grew apart. Darren kept going back to the tunnel, always alone. Thomas never did. But the dreams followed him. Dreams of darkness, of narrow passages and blackened chambers, of hands reaching out from the walls, of Darren's face with empty holes where his eyes should be, dreams of something crawling across the ceiling, of something whispering his name. And sometimes in those dreams, Thomas sees the chamber again in the last one, and the one with the mattress. He sees it as it was that day, and he knows. He knows that when he looks back, when he turns to face the darkness, there will be the face staring back at him. Not Darren's, not his own. A face with no features, no eyes, no mouth, just darkness, endless and empty. This is how Thomas remembers that day, and this is how I remember the story, logged here in the hidden archives of Bethnal Green, filed under unresolved. The kind of story that doesn't end, not really. The kind that waits, patient and cold, in the corners of the city until someone else comes along. Someone curious enough to open a door that should have stayed shut. Now, I thought this story was resolved at that point, but a year later, while cleaning out some of the archives, I actually found another log that reminded me of the story that I'd read a few years before, of Thomas and Darren. It was dated just a few years later, after Darren and Thomas's ill-fated adventure, and it wasn't just notes. This time there was VHS footage. Unfortunately, well, hopefully at some point the intern will be able to help us digitize these VHSs, but currently I'm not quite sure how to do that, so you'll have to bear with me. It was a little grainy, shaky tape that felt heavier than it should have done when I held it in my hands, like the weight was captured inside and settled into the plastic. Bizarre, I know, but... Have you felt a Betamax? You probably haven't, but if you had like a Betamax tape, they're much heavier. This was a VHS, but it was denser. There was like substance in it. Anyway, the point is, the footage was shot by someone who knew what they were doing. In a sense, you could see a team of two men dressed like contractors standing at the tunnel entrance. The date stamped at the bottom corner read 1994. The men had a portable light with them, the kind that casts harsh, almost surgical shadows. They don't look happy to be there, but there was a grim determination in their expressions, the kind you see in people who know they have a job to do, no matter the risk. The footage cut to them making their way out the tunnel. The light bounced off the walls, illuminating the same familiar bricks, the same gaping darkness. I recognised it immediately, the tunnel that Darren and Thomas had entered years before. They kept moving deeper until the camera caught something strange in the periphery of the beam. It was subtle at first, almost like the darkness was a little thicker in one spot, clinging to the bricks in the way shadows shouldn't. And then it moved, just slightly, just enough to make the viewer question if they'd seen anything at all. The camera focusing on that very patched darkness, the longer the light stayed in it, the more the shape seemed to shift. And slowly, something began to seep from the wall. It was like a liquid shadow, viscous, creeping down the bricks and pooling at the base. The camera zooms in, capturing the glossy, almost oil-like texture of it. One of the men approached cautiously. He had a metal rod in his hand, the kind he used to probe at something dangerous without getting too close. So he reaches out to touch in this black ooze, and as soon as he did, it reacted, pulling back, like it was alive. Like that Spider-Man film with the guy, his friend that goes bad. Anyway, first it spilled out from the crack, pooling and growing, twisting from the ground. The blackness coalesced and thickened until it began to take the shape of something that was, I don't know, like wrong almost. It looked like a human, but stretched, elongated. The arms were too long, spindly legs. The torso was hunched. Had an ape-like quality, but there was nothing natural about it. The darkness that formed its body seemed to shift and ripple, like it wasn't fully solid, like it could dissolve back into the shadow at any moment. Then the contractors stumbled back and the camera started shaking wildly, and I could hear the panicked breaths and scrape of their bodies on the tunnel floor. The creature started to move slowly at first, almost uncertain, then with a fluidity seemed too deliberate. It turned its head, or what should have been its head, towards the camera, and even though the grainy footage, I could feel the malice radiating from it. There were no eyes, no face, just a void of darkness, and yet I watched. The thing almost knew I was watching it through the tape. It just stared at me and got closer and closer, and then it just cut out. And nothing, static. I mean, whoever logged this footage back then must have been just as unnerved as I was, because the note stopped there. incomplete, as if they couldn't bear to write down what they'd just seen, or maybe they simply didn't know how to describe it. I kept coming back to that footage in my mind, the way the darkness moved, the way it seemed to grow out of the very place Darren and Thomas had described years before. It made me wonder if there was a classification for something like this in the old system we use here. I ended up categorizing it as a Class 5 entity, an amorphous manifestation capable of altering its form, something between shadow and substance. It was unlike anything else I had logged before, but it fit the parameters of the phenomenon that could both affect and inhabit physical space in unsettling ways, so it makes sense. Makes me wonder what else is down there, waiting in the dark, hidden behind those walls. And how many times has it seeped out, only to slink back into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but fear and unanswered questions? It's things like this that I share cautiously on my channel. My intern says it's the kind of content people crave, but I don't know. I feel like they want to hear the stuff that is a little bit creepy, but won't keep them up at night. But stuff like this is different. My grandkids think it's cool, I suppose. In a way it is, but if they knew the real weight of the stories and the way they cling to you, haunt you, maybe they'd think twice before asking for more. With the intern's help, these recordings are finally seeing the light of day, or at least the glow of a computer screen. Maybe that's what these stories need, to be heard. Or maybe that's what they've been waiting for all along. Well, anyway, that's me signing off for today. Felix here at the Bethnal Green's Forgotten Library as the archivist. Apparently, if you enjoyed the content, ring a bell and follow me, or follow the channel I'm not really sure. You probably know best. Over and out.